Mac bought the isolated stone house to escape his memories of the war. But his German Shepherd had other plans. One night, the dog dug up a rusted ammunition box beneath the basement floor, dragging a 50-year-old secret into the light. Inside was not just a collar, it was a photograph that stopped Mac hard, proof that the best friend he believed he had left behind in the jungle had been waiting for him here all along. The gravel crunched loudly beneath the tires of the old pickup truck as it climbed the winding path up Blackwood Ridge. The engine sputtered and coughed, struggling against the steep incline of the West Virginia mountains, before finally coming to a halt in front of a structure that looked more like a fortress than a home. Thomas McAllister, known simply as Mac, killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the wind whistling through the turning autumn leaves. Mac sat behind the wheel for a moment, his grip tight on the steering wheel. At 60 years old, he was a man carved from granite and regret. His face was weathered by sun and time, with deep lines etched around weary eyes that had seen too much. He wore a faded flannel shirt and work boots that had walked miles of difficult terrain. He was a former Marine who carried himself with a stiff, disciplined posture, though his shoulders now slumped under an invisible weight. Beside him in the passenger seat sat his only companion. Shadow was a magnificent 4-year-old German Shepherd. He was large and powerful, with a rare and striking coat of thick silver and gray fur that seemed to shimmer in the dull light. Shadow possessed a calm, watchful posture, his amber eyes scanning the perimeter with the intensity of a soldier on patrol. He did not bark, he simply waited for the command. "We are here, boy," Mac murmured, his voice rough like sandpaper. They stepped out into the crisp mountain air. The house was built of gray stone, cold and uninviting. The real estate agent had sold it as is, warning Mac about the isolation and the dampness, but that was exactly what Mac wanted. He was not looking for comfort. He was looking for a place where the world could not find him. Inside, the house smelled of dust and pine resin. Mac began the slow process of unloading his few belongings. He moved mechanically, emptying boxes without enthusiasm. From the bottom of a duffel bag, his hand brushed against a small velvet case. He froze. Slowly, he opened it. Inside lay a purple heart medal, its gold border dull in the dim light. He stared at it, his chest tightening. Most men would display such an honor on a mantle. Mac looked at it with a mixture of shame and pain. With a sharp exhale, he shoved the box to the very back of a bottom drawer, burying it under a pile of wool socks. He slammed the drawer shut. He had not come here to remember the war. He had come here to forget it. A low, rumbling whine broke his concentration. Mac turned to see Shadow standing in the hallway. The dog was not exploring or sniffing for food. Instead, Shadow was sitting rigid and alert in front of a heavy wooden door that led to the basement. His ears were pricked forward, and his nose twitched as he inhaled deeply near the gap at the bottom of the door. "Shadow, come here," Mac commanded. The dog did not move. Shadow remained frozen, his gaze locked on the wood as if he could see through it. He let out another soft, anxious sound, a high-pitched whimper that grated on Mac's nerves. Mac walked over, his boots thudding heavily on the floorboards. He grabbed Shadow by the collar, his touch firm but not cruel. "Leave it," Mac snapped, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. "There is nothing down there, Shadow, just rats and old memories. We leave it alone." He pulled the dog away. Shadow followed, but he cast one last longing look back at the dark timber, his eyes filled with a knowing sadness that Mac refused to acknowledge. Mac walked into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, his hand trembling slightly. He told himself he wanted peace, but deep down, he knew the truth. You can run halfway across the country, but you can never outrun the things you carry in your own head. The storm descended upon Blackwood Ridge 3 nights later, unleashing a torrent of freezing rain that battered the stone walls of the old house. Inside, the air grew heavy and cold. Mac lay awake in his cot, listening to the wind howl like a wounded animal around the eaves. Sleep was a luxury he rarely could afford, and tonight, the storm made the silence of his mind impossible to find. Suddenly, the sound of scratching wood cut through the noise of the rain. It came from the hallway. Mac sat up, his heart rate spiking instantly. "Shadow?" he called out into the darkness. There was no familiar trot of paws returning to the bedroom. Instead, a loud, heavy thud echoed through the floorboards. It was the sound of the heavy basement door being forced open. Mac grabbed his flashlight and swung his legs out of bed. He moved with the urgency of a man under attack, rushing into the hallway. The beam of his light cut through the gloom, illuminating the open door to the cellar. From the darkness below, he heard frantic digging, the wet rhythmic sound of claws tearing into earth. "Shadow, stand down!" Mac shouted, descending the wooden stairs 2 at a time. The basement smelled of wet soil and decay. Water had leaked through the old foundation, turning a corner of the dirt floor into mud. In the center of the mess was Shadow. The large German Shepherd was digging with a manic intensity, his silver and gray coat mud spattered. He was not playing. He was on a mission. "Stop it!" Mac lunged forward to grab the dog collar. But before he could pull the dog away, Shadow clamped his jaws around something buried deep in the mud and heaved backward. With a wet suction sound, a rusted metal object broke free from the earth. It was an old military ammunition box, wrapped in decaying wax paper. Shadow dropped the box at Mac's feet and stepped back, his chest heaving, his amber eyes fixed on his master. Mac stared at the box. His hands began to tremble. He knew that shape. He knew that shade of olive drab paint. Slowly, as if moving underwater, he knelt on the damp floor. He wiped the mud from the latch and pried it open. The metal groaned in protest. Inside, there were no bullets. The box was filled with leather dog collars, coiled neatly like sleeping snakes. On top of them lay a plastic bag containing a leather-bound diary and a single yellowed photograph. Mac shone the flashlight on the photo. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It was a black and white picture of a K-9 unit taken in a jungle clearing. In the center of the group stood a young Marine, barely 20 years old, with a confident grin and a hand resting on the head of a massive German Shepherd. Mac stopped breathing. The young Marine was him. The year was 1971. A wave of nausea crashed over him, more violent than any physical blow. This was not just a collection of random artifacts. This was his own history, the very chapter of his life he had spent 40 years running from. "No," Mac whispered, his voice cracking. "No, I cannot look at this." He slammed the lid of the box shut. Panic clawed at his throat. He grabbed the box, intending to shove it back into the muddy hole, to cover it up, to hide it forever. "We are burying this," Mac rasped, his eyes wide with fear. "We are burying it right now." A low, rumbling growl vibrated through the small room. Mac froze. He looked up. Shadow was standing over the hole, blocking the way. The dog lips were pulled back slightly, baring white teeth. He was not growling at an intruder. He was growling at Mac. The dog stood firm, his posture unyielding, refusing to let Mac run away this time. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky of brilliant, piercing blue. The morning air was crisp and smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves. For a fleeting moment, the mountain seemed peaceful, a deceptive calm that settled over the stone house. But that silence was shattered by the smooth mechanical hum of an engine approaching up the driveway. A sleek black SUV, polished to a mirror shine, navigated the muddy ruts of the road with arrogant ease. It looked alien against the backdrop of the rugged wilderness, a shiny beetle intruding on nature. The vehicle came to a stop next to Mac's rusted pickup truck, highlighting the stark contrast between the two worlds. Mac stood on the porch, a mug of cold coffee in his hand. He wore his worn jacket, his posture defensive. Beside him, Shadow stood rigid. The silver and white German Shepherd let out a low, vibrating growl that rumbled deep in his chest, his hackles raised in a line of spiked fur along his spine. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was in his 30s, dressed in a sharp, tailored charcoal suit that cost more than Mac's truck. His shoes were polished leather, already collecting specks of mud. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the house with a mix of appraisal and disdain. This was the representative from Black Ridge Mining. "Mr. McAllister?" the man asked, his voice smooth and practiced. He did not offer a hand to shake. "I am here on behalf of Black Ridge Energy." Mac tightened his grip on the coffee mug. "I did not call for any service." "We are not a service, Mr. McAllister," the representative said, pulling a folded document from his jacket pocket. "We are the owners, or rather, the owners of what matters." He walked up the steps, ignoring Shadow's menacing posture. He handed the document to Mac. It was a legal deed, dense with jargon. "You own the house, and you own the surface rights," the man explained, his tone bored, as if explaining simple math to a child. "But Black Ridge has held the mineral rights to this entire valley for over 50 years. That includes everything beneath your foundation." Mac scanned the paper, his eyes blurring over the words. "What do you want?" "Ventilation," the man said simply. "We are expanding the coal seam extraction to the north. We need to sink a vertical ventilation shaft right here, specifically where your current basement is located." Mac felt the blood drain from his face. "You cannot do that. There are things down there, historical things." He tried to explain. He spoke of the ammunition box, the collars, the diary of Captain Miller. He spoke of the memorial to the dogs who had served. The representative listened with a blank expression. When Mac finished, the man sighed and checked his watch. "Mr. McAllister, look," the man said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I understand you found some old trinkets, but let me be clear. History does not record dogs, and neither does the law. To the state, those are just animal remains and debris blocking a multi-million-dollar operation." The words hit Mac like a physical blow. Trinkets, debris. "You have 48 hours to clear out your personal effects," the representative continued, turning back to his car. "The heavy equipment arrives on Friday. Do not make this difficult for yourself." The car door closed with a solid, expensive thud. As the SUV reversed and drove away, Mac stood frozen on the porch. The piece of paper in his hand fluttered in the wind. He looked down at Shadow, who was watching the car disappear. A crushing weight settled onto Mac's shoulders. He was just one old man against a corporate giant. The urge to run, to pack up the truck and flee before the excavators arrived, surged through him with terrifying power. Night had fallen over the valley, wrapping the stone house in a suffocating shroud of darkness. Inside, the only light came from a single, flickering lamp on the kitchen table. Mac moved around the room with jerky, frantic motions. He was packing. He threw his few shirts into a duffel bag, followed by his shaving kit. He was doing what he had always done best. He was retreating. "We leave at dawn," Mac muttered to the empty room, avoiding the gaze of the dog watching him from the corner. "We take the check and we go somewhere else, somewhere warm, somewhere with no basements." He reached for his jacket, but a wet nose nudged his hand away. Mac looked down. Shadow was standing there, his ears pinned back. In his mouth, he held a dark circular object. Gently, the dog placed it on Mac's lap. It was one of the old leather collars from the basement. Mac sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Shadow, take that back. We are not keeping it." But Shadow did not move. He rested his chin on Mac's knee, his amber eyes imploring. Mac groaned and picked up the collar to toss it aside. As the leather turned in his hand, the lamplight caught the dull glint of the brass nameplate. Mac froze. He squinted at the stamped letters, worn smooth by time and fur. "Rex, USMC, 4772." The air left Mac's lungs in a sharp, painful gasp. The room seemed to spin. The sound of the wind outside faded, replaced by a noise from 50 years ago. The rhythmic, deafening thumping of helicopter blades. Suddenly, Mac was not in West Virginia. He was back in the humid, burning air of 1971. His leg was screaming in agony, shattered by shrapnel. Strong hands were dragging him across the grass, hauling him into the bay of a medevac chopper. "Rex!" Mac screamed in the memory, his voice raw. "Get the dog! Get Rex!" Through the swirling dust and the chaos of the liftoff, he looked down. Below him, a large German Shepherd was running desperately after the rising machine. Rex was barking, jumping, trying to follow the master he had protected through hell. "We can't take him! No room!" the loadmaster had yelled, pushing Mac back. Mac watched helplessly as the figure of his dog grew smaller and smaller, a lone warrior abandoned in a green hell. The official report later said Rex was missing in action. Mac had lived half a century believing his best friend had died alone and terrified in the jungle. Mac blinked, hot tears spilling onto his cheeks. It was the first time he had cried since the war ended. He looked at the collar in his trembling hands. Rex had not died in the jungle. Captain Miller had gone back. Miller had saved them. Rex had lived his life right here, in this house, safe and loved. He had waited. Mac looked down at Shadow. In the dim light, the silver dog looked so much like the ghost of the friend he had betrayed. "I am sorry," Mac whispered, his voice breaking into a sob. He buried his face in Shadow's thick neck fur, weeping for the years lost and the guilt carried. "I am so sorry I left you, buddy." Shadow leaned his weight against Mac, offering a silent, steady comfort. Mac wiped his eyes. The fear that had controlled him for decades began to harden into something else. It hardened into iron. He looked at the duffel bag on the table. With a slow, deliberate movement, he unzipped it and dumped his clothes back onto the floor. "No," Mac said to the empty room, his voice low and dangerous. "I ran away once. I'm not leaving you behind again." The 48-hour deadline expired with the rising sun. The morning mist still clung to the valley floor when the ground began to tremble. It was a deep, rhythmic vibration that traveled up through the soles of Mac boots. The roar of heavy diesel engines shattered the peace of the mountain, growing louder with every passing second. A massive yellow excavator crested the hill, its steel tracks tearing up the grass of the front lawn. Behind it, a black company car followed like a shark trailing a predator. The machinery came to a halt just yards from the stone house, the hydraulic arm of the excavator hanging in the air like a poised weapon. The Black Ridge site manager stepped out of the car. He adjusted his hard hat and walked toward the porch, his face set in a mask of corporate impatience. He expected to find a frightened old man packing his bags. Instead, he stopped dead in his tracks. Thomas McAllister stood in the center of the driveway, blocking the path to the basement. He was not wearing his flannel shirt. He was dressed in his Marine Corps dress blues. The uniform was old, and the fabric was tight across his broad shoulders, but it was immaculate. The brass buttons gleamed in the morning light, and a row of medals sat proudly on his chest. In his right hand, he held a large American flag, the wooden pole planted firmly in the earth. Beside him sat Shadow. The silver and white German Shepherd sat at a perfect heel position, his chest puffed out, his amber eyes locked on the machine. He did not bark. He simply watched, a silent guardian ready to hold the line. "Mr. McAllister," the manager shouted over the idle rumble of the engine, "move aside. If you do not move, we will press charges for obstruction. You will be sued for every penny you have. You will lose this house. You will lose your pension. You will lose everything." Mac looked at the man, his expression as cold and hard as the stone of his house. He did not shout. He spoke with a quiet, terrifying calm. "I have lost enough," Mac said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "I lost my soul in the jungle in 1971. Today, I have nothing left to lose." The manager signaled the operator. The engine revved, a loud mechanical scream. The excavator lurched forward a few feet, the steel bucket lowering menacingly. Mac did not flinch. Shadow did not move a muscle. They stood alone, a frail barrier of flesh and cloth against tons of steel. Then a new sound cut through the tension. It started as a low hum and grew into a rumble of its own. From the winding road below, a truck appeared. Then another, and another. A convoy of battered pickup trucks, American flags waving from their beds, surged up the driveway. They parked in a chaotic line, blocking the excavator completely. Doors opened and men stepped out. They were old. Some leaned heavily on canes. One man adjusted a prosthetic leg as he exited his vehicle. They wore faded hats embroidered with the names of foreign wars and distant battles. These were the men of the local VFW. They did not carry weapons. They did not scream or fight. They simply walked forward and formed a line beside Mac. They folded their arms and stood shoulder to shoulder, a human wall of gray hair and weathered faces. Mac looked at the man beside him, a stranger with kind eyes, and felt a lump form in his throat. He had called for help, begging to save his friend's memory, and his brothers had answered. The site manager looked at the line of veterans, then at the American flag waving in Mac's hand, and finally at the phone in his pocket. He knew he could not bulldoze a line of war heroes. The PR disaster would be catastrophic. With a furious curse, the manager waved his hand. The excavator engine wound down into silence. The metal beast retreated. On the porch of the stone house, the old soldier and his dog stood tall, surrounded by an army of brothers they had never met, but who had refused to leave them behind. Winter arrived early in the Appalachian Mountains that year. A thick blanket of pristine white snow covered the scars on the front lawn where the excavator tracks had once threatened to tear the earth apart. The air was cold and still, but for the first time since moving to Blackwood Ridge, Thomas McAllister did not feel the chill in his bones. The silence of the valley was no longer heavy with loneliness. It was filled with peace. The battle with Black Ridge Energy had ended, not with a bang, but with a quiet retreat. Terrified of the public relations nightmare that would come from bulldozing a site protected by war heroes, the corporation had withdrawn their equipment the very next day. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from the state capitol. The governor had signed a special decree designating the property as a protected historical site for military working dogs. Mac walked slowly down the stairs to the basement. It was no longer a damp, muddy hole. Over the last 3 months, with the help of the local veterans, he had transformed it. The stone walls were scrubbed clean, and the dirt floor was now covered with smooth gravel. Warm lighting bathed the room in a golden glow. Along the main wall, a series of simple glass cases had been mounted. Inside each one rested a leather collar, cleaned and oiled, with its brass nameplate shining softly. In the center case, resting on a velvet cushion, was the collar that had started it all. Beneath the name Rex, Mac had placed a small handwritten card that read, "Welcome home." Mac heard the crunch of tires on the snowy driveway. He walked back upstairs and stepped onto the porch, Shadow trotting faithfully at his heel. A pickup truck had parked near the gate. A young man stepped out. He was perhaps 30 years old, wearing a heavy jacket. He moved with a distinct limp, his left pant leg pinned up to accommodate a prosthetic limb. Holding his hand was a small girl in a pink coat. They walked slowly toward the basement entrance, which Mac had left open for visitors. Mac stayed on the porch, watching them. He saw the young veteran kneel with difficulty in front of the glass cases. He saw the man point to the collars and whisper something to his daughter. The wind carried the young man's voice across the yard. "Do you see them, sweetie? These dogs are the reason Daddy made it back to you." Mac felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire inside. The knot of guilt that had tightened his stomach for 50 years finally unraveled. He wasn't just guarding bones anymore. He was guarding hope. He walked over to a wooden sign he had carved himself and planted it firmly in the snow beside the entrance. It was simple, rough-hewn timber with burnt lettering, "Where old soldiers rest." Mac looked down at Shadow. The great silver dog looked up, his amber eyes soft and content. He licked Mac's hand, a gesture of pure affection. "Come on, Shadow," Mac whispered, his voice steady and light. "Let's go inside. The job is done." They turned and walked into the warmth of the stone house, leaving the door unlocked behind them. History might forget their names, and the law might not recognize their souls, but on this quiet ridge, they would be remembered forever. The silent promise between a veteran and his dog is a bond that not even time can break. Mac found his peace by honoring that vow, and today you have helped keep that memory alive simply by watching. If you believe that no hero should ever be forgotten, please welcome yourself into our community by subscribing and liking this video. We would be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments below, so please share them before clicking the next story of courage waiting for you on the screen.